we are going to introduce what is the importance of this segment, when we are going to introduce not only the flow, the structure of chapters, which anyways you are going to do in a chronological manner, in a chronology. But more than that, the purpose of the course outline is to understand the demand of the ancient Indian history. So the demand of the area, very important. One of the oft asked questions is that how should we prepare? Not only in terms of textbooks, which are the areas to emphasize? Many a times we find that there is a general tendency to ignore ancient Indian history, but given the recent pattern where 4 to 6 questions are asked from ancient Indian history and art and culture in prelims examination, it is a very high risk to ignore this section. There is a myth that ancient Indian history is more about facts. And also it is a common problem that people find ancient Indian history, medieval history, quite difficult and sometimes boring in comparison to modern India. Maybe the reason is that we are not aware of what was there in ancient India. And when we also know that working on ancient Indian history, especially 3 4 years back, is not going to pay huge dividend, so it was taken more as a burden, more as a necessary evil which has to be somehow covered and then left for the examination, especially in prelims. If you want, you can address 1 or 2 questions or leave it also. So because of this, people have not really devoted or dedicated the right amount of effort and time, and sometimes this can backfire. Especially now when we find that the cutoff is around 100, 110. There are difficult questions from environment, ecology, current affairs, which is at times a very hard nut to crack. So we have to point out those areas, select those areas which are not that easy like a modern India question, but definitely if prepared in the right spirit, in the right way, it can place you at a huge advantage of 10 to 12 marks. And the bigger question is how not to overdo the subject, because it is very easy to prepare the subject exhaustively if you have interest or if you understand that it is important. But given the vast amount of syllabus, I would never recommend to devote more than 15 to 18 days in covering entire ancient Indian history along with the other readings that you are doing. And you should not take up any additional books apart from R.S. Sharma, Old NCERT, Class 11. So R.S. Sharma, Ancient Indian History, Old NCERT, Class 11, this book along with your tablet is more than sufficient to give you an overview and also the necessary tools and knowledge to help and solve the right questions. Let me tell you, there is no perfect book in the market, or it has not been written, that can help you to solve every question. But if you cover these two, you can be rest assured that you will be able to not only address the questions but definitely eliminate the wrong options. And now the question is, after having understood and decided the source, the question is how to go about the subject. When the general level of awareness, exposure to ancient Indian history is minimal, especially for students from science background, what should be the correct approach? What areas are to focus? What are the areas where only a brief perusal will do? And then we also need to have a structure. So before that, before going into details, the flow of the subject, which is equally very important, let us briefly get through the syllabus of UPSC with respect to ancient Indian history. Now in the preliminary examination, we find that the syllabus mentions history of India from the beginning of community life to independence. Post-independent India is generally not asked. However, there are times when outlier questions can be asked. So I would say from Stone Age to 1947, the syllabus has been broken up into ancient, medieval and modern Indian history. In the mains examination, UPSC does not explicitly mention ancient history. But ancient history cannot be ignored because the study of Indian culture, which is a very important part of GS paper 1, cannot be understood. So ancient Indian culture is mentioned in terms of salient features of art forms, literature, architecture, from ancient to modern times, this has a linkage with ancient Indian history. I always wonder how you are able to follow a silo-based approach between history, that is ancient India, and cultural history. Both of them are intertwined. For example, if you have to read about the Mauryan stupas, the Buddhist stupas during Mauryan times, then you not only have to study about the Buddhist ideals, but while understanding the nature of material being used, the degree of ornamentation, you get a fair idea of the economic prosperity, the geographical spread, the development of transportation, and above all, the power of the patronage. So, political history, economic history, social history, and cultural history, they are interlinked. They are very much interlinked. Let me give you an example to make this clear. We know that, and you will be reading that Satavahana kings were patrons of Vedic Brahmanism. They patronized Brahmanism, they were Shaivites. But the queens of Satavahana kings, such as the mother of Gautamiputra Satkarni or Queen Naganika, they used to patronize Buddhism. Why? Because Satavahana ruled in Deccan, which was very close to the northern southern trade route, that is Dakshinapath, where a number of traders and merchants, they were followers of Buddhism and Jainism. So by giving donations to Buddhist caves, to the Buddhist viharas and monasteries, they were actually winning the support, the legitimacy of the Satavahana rulers in the otherwise non-Brahmanical section was threatened. So if you don't understand the purpose, for you, the patronage of Buddhist caves by the Satavahana queens is merely a fact. A fact, when analyzed, it becomes an idea, an information, and a complete package. So when students ask me that how far is it important to remember dates, I say don't remember dates, but at least have a framework of flow and continuity of events which are following. And when you have an overall structure, say from Stone Age to the beginning of agriculture, from beginning of agriculture to urbanization, then you can easily place milestones in the form of important years, or I would say, even if you are able to come up with centuries, it would make two. If you don't remember exactly when the Mauryan dynasty started, say 323 BC, at least you can say in the first quarter of 4th century BC, it started, it would be more than okay. But you need to understand the flow, how the events are connected, and then you will enjoy the subject. So please never take it for granted that because your main syllabus does not explicitly mention ancient Indian history, you can conveniently ignore. Let me tell you, 3-4 years back, a question was asked on decline of coinage. Decline of coinage in post-Gupta period. It was not only asked how do you account for the decline of coinage, but also what was the medium of exchange. Now, coinage is definitely a part of art and culture. But you cannot answer this question without bringing into account the general trend of political decentralization, especially in North India, because of the system of land grants. So because of the system of land grants, this political decentralization, we see the Samanta system coming up. India's feudal age started. So without understanding the political history, the economic history, the social history, you will never be able to answer the question. Also, a question was asked with respect to the cultural developments, literary developments in the time of Krishna Deva Raya. Now again, when we talk about the Vijayanagar kingdom, we have to understand not only the place, not only the region, but also how it was an assemblage of people who came up from nearby areas. Because in the Brahmanic kingdom, which was the cradle of Urdu literature, here in the nearby Vijayanagar, it was the cradle, it was developing as a center of learning for literature in other languages, say Telugu, Kannada, Tamil, even Sanskrit. So in this light, we have to understand, and also the personality of Krishna Deva Raya, who himself was a notable literary figure. So never make this mistake. But again, I do not mean to say that every time when you prepare for your mains examination, you You have to make exactly the same amount of effort as you have done in your preliminary examination. But again, there is a rider that prepare in a way in the preliminary examination so that besides the fact you also have an overall framework in your mind. Now, if we talk about the course outline, the first thing that I always tell to students is that you should focus on continuity and flow. You should focus on continuity and flow. You should understand how the subject is moving, how the change is happening, what are the agencies of change. So always focus on agencies of change. Means if a change is happening, definitely there has to be a stimulant or a number of factors. So what are those factors because of which there is a change or there is a disruption in the flow? For example, I'll give you a simple example. In the later Vedic age, when we see agriculture was adopted, still agricultural produce did not contribute to urbanization. But around 6th century BC, we find that with the beginning of use of iron in agriculture, as historians like D.D. Koshambi, R.S. Sharma say, North India witnessed what is known as iron revolution. North India witnessed an iron revolution. An iron revolution catalyzed the development, the rise of urbanization, and also the rise of political states in the form of Mahajanpads. So we find Mahajanpads, 16 Mahajanpads. We see second urbanization, and also how second urbanization and development in the field of economy contributed to the growth of Buddhism and Jainism, and also patronage to a number of heterodox sects. You have to understand what are the heterodox sects. And in your syllabus, you have to do Buddhism, Jainism, and Ajivikas. So we do have to start the flow from the beginning of community life, Stone Age, to proto-historic period, that is IVC and Vedic age. We have to understand what is the prehistory. Prehistory is that period of time when the knowledge of the ancient past was based on, when the study was based on archaeological evidences only or archaeological sources only. Whereas in proto-history we have a script. For example, the script was there in Indus Valley civilization, but the script was not decipherable. Also in this proto-historic period, we find that the knowledge is available, the literary evidence is available, but from other sources. For example, with respect to Indus Valley civilization, we have a decipherable. Decipherable means you are able to read. We know that we have not been able to read the Indus Valley script. So literary evidence is available from other sources, contemporary sources. For example, we have Mesopotamian sources. Now with respect to Vedic age, there is also a difference of opinion among the historians that whether Vedic age belongs to a proto-historic period or not. Proto-historic where we have archaeological evidence and we have contemporary literary evidence from other sources. So there is a debate, and some of the historians believe that even though writing of Vedic knowledge was not done until 5th century BC, but yet the knowledge was preserved, and the knowledge was written in the same Brahmi script. So some believe that Vedic period is not, some believe that it is, yes. So we will still go by the conventional standard. Now ancient historical period is that period which starts from 6th century BC. So this starts from 6th century BC, where the study of history is based on both archaeological sources and literary evidences. It is based on both archaeological sources. So we have 6th century BC, we have Mauryas, we have Guptas, history of South India, post-Mauryas, post-Gupta, pre-Maurya, so all this. So from here, we have a better understanding of the historical events. Now talking about prehistory, Stone Age. Why this is known as Stone Age? First of all, we know that because it was a part of prehistoric period, the Stone Age was studied mainly on the basis of tools. So this is known as Stone Age because the use of stone tools and the study of stone tools was the primary basis of understanding. But it would be wrong to say that only stone tools were the basis of study of the community life in this period from 5 lakh BC to 1000 BC. Some books also use 2800 BC, because after 2800 we have the beginning of Indus Valley civilization, Chalcolithic period. So we have Stone Age understanding on the basis of stone tools. We also have understanding on the basis of, say, food habits, animal remains. We have habitation, that is house. We have habitation. So we have a plethora, but the most important is stone tools. Now again, talking about stone tools, the nature of stone tools, the shape, the size, the surface glaze has been changing from Paleolithic to Mesolithic and from Mesolithic to Neolithic. Now, this is Paleolithic era. Paleos means old stone. This is Paleo means old. Lithic means old Stone Age. Here we have a hunting gathering community. I'll not get into much detail. We are already going to do that. But this was the old Stone Age in which we have the beginning of community life. We have the beginning of large stone tools in the form of boulders. Boulders were used for chopping of meat. That was the purpose they used to hunt. Then we have Mesolithic. And Mesolithic period is also to be studied with respect to the change in climatic conditions. For example, Paleolithic era was a part of Pleistocene. It was a part of Pleistocene or the Ice Age. Whereas Mesolithic at 10,000 BC, Pleistocene Ice Age, which was a very difficult time for the growth of plants and animals, that is flora and fauna, this was succeeded by, in 10,000 BC, we had what is known as Holocene. And Holocene was a warm and humid climate. And in Holocene, we find Mesolithic and Neolithic. So now with warming of the climate, the sea level rises. Because of the rise of sea level, many of the people in the coastal belt move inwards. This also leads to increase in population, because of which now hunting, gathering and was not possible to cater to the increasing population demands, because of which probably we also had to explore new forms of food, and this would have also contributed to agriculture, something that we study in Neolithic era. Mesolithic era is also a time where we find that domestication of animals started. We have evidence from Adamgarh and Bagor. Mesolithic is the time when we also find the use of small tools, microliths. So as mankind is progressing, we find that the tools become smaller and more refined. In fact, in Neolithic era, microliths continued, but in Neolithic era, we have igneous rocks. And because the purpose of the stone tools was for grinding and for cutting of meat, so the igneous rocks, the tools were having polished surfaces. Neolithic era was known as New Stone Age. This was also the era where we find the beginning of agriculture. Anyways, we are going to discuss how the beginning of agriculture brought a transformative change about our perspective, about the way we lived our life. And it would be honest to say that all the changes that happened in the mankind was only after some of the important inventions. First was definitely the invention of fire, which helped us to protect ourselves from wild animals in the clearing of forests, and also for better cooking of food. And then the next big invention was agriculture. We now were no longer dependent only on the accidental discovery of food or on animals, but also we were able to control. And this helped us to plan our future better. The agricultural surplus later gives rise to urbanization. We'll cover more how to store food. We needed pots to cook, to consume food. We needed pots. For making pots, we needed potters. So these all developments were like a chain reaction, one after the other or linked with one another. A vast web was being created. Let us understand some types of questions being asked in UPSC. question, the upper Paleolithic age coincided with last phase of Ice Age. See now, what is the meaning of upper? So when archaeological evidence was done, for example, if this is the earth, this is the surface, then as you go deeper, at any point you start digging. As you go deeper, that means you are going into further past. So lower Paleolithic age will be the earliest, then middle Paleolithic age, and then the upper Paleolithic age. And I just give you a brief idea that Paleolithic age was the last of Pleistocene. So definitely upper Paleolithic age will be the last phase of Ice Age. Mesolithic and Neolithic belong to Holocene. Yes, that's true. So now you see that you know that first and second are definitely correct. So you can eliminate these two. And now you have to see Adamgarh. It is the evidence of domestication. Yes, this is also right. But many times you find that by eliminating few options, the answer becomes very obvious. That is what you have to learn in prelims. You have to be absolutely sure that this is correct or this is definitely not correct. Because if you are going to do that, you will have more and greater probability of getting the right answer. So you can see the answer is 1, 2, 3. Now, proto-history. Proto-historic period, we have to understand Indus Valley Civilization. The name Indus Valley Civilization has come. This was the first urbanization in Indian subcontinent. One of the greatest, I would say the greatest urban civilization in that time. And why the name Indus Valley? Because most of the urban sites, now let me tell you, not all the sites were across Indus River basins. Most of the urban sites were there. So in this chapter, we have to understand the geographical spread, how it was spread, and how on the basis of its vast geographical spread, Indus Valley Civilization was the largest civilization in terms of its area than the Huanghu, the Mesopotamian civilization. And because of its geographical spread, the resource base was also vast. This we'll understand. And besides this, the Indus Valley people, they had very good trade connections by which they used to procure goods from all over India and all over the world. Then another exceptional aspect of IBC is their aspect of town planning with emphasis on hygiene, with emphasis on defense, with emphasis on drainage. So all this we have to understand. And in fact, even today, it is found that the elements of Indus Valley urban planning is found in the present day urban planning. So we have to understand that how they were able to judiciously use their prospects, how they were able to judiciously use the available resources. Why we don't find any palaces, temples, all this in Indus Valley, despite having a belief system. We'll understand their subsistence base, very important. So we have to understand their subsistence base, the agriculture, trade and commerce, the trade networks, the items of trade, what was the basis of exchange, was there any currency or not, what was the purpose of seals, what was the literacy level, all this, society and belief system. Is it right to say that the Pashupati seal refers to a person known as Proto-Shiva? So we'll discuss about the seals, Pashupati seal. What elements of Indus Valley belief system is present in the present day society, such as the swastika symbol. We have to understand the swastika symbol. We have to understand Annapurna. So many of the historians have said that the worship of Mother Earth started from Indus Valley. Elements of change, how the Indus Valley people were different from the Aryans who came later. And then the various decline theories. It is very intriguing and interesting that even today, more and more theories are coming up. Only recently, in fact in 2020, IIT Kharagpur had linked the decline of Dholavira. I'm sure you would have heard of Dholavira, recently been a part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So decline of Dholavira with the drying of river Saraswati. You have to understand all this in this aspect, and Indus Valley Civilization is going to be exhaustively covered. Let us see a question on Indus Valley. Which of the following characterizes They possessed great palaces and temples. Now again, you don't have to remember everything, but if you understand their mindset behind town planning, then you will be able to analyze. Now we know that first is definitely wrong. We will eliminate. They worshipped both male and female deities. Yes, it's right. They did worship. We have Mother Earth. We have Pashupati. They employed horse-drawn chariots in warfare. Now, with respect to horse, there is a lot of controversy. A lot of controversy with respect to horse. Now it is said that at a place known as Surkotada, horse horse bones have been found. But that is more of an exception. There was no general awareness. Otherwise, like other animal bones, they would have been found in plenty. There is no depiction. And as far as chariots are there, definitely it is wrong. Because this is something that we associate with Aryans. So now we can eliminate. We can eliminate 3. In fact, we don't have to. We already have our right answer. So we find that many a times the questions can be answered with the help of the elimination method where you're absolutely sure. And you will be absolutely sure of an option only when you have covered the subject, any portion, with detail and with complete comprehension. Now moving to Vedic age. Vedic age from 1500 BC to 600 BC. Now the name Vedic age has come because the knowledge, information about the society, economy, polity, belief system, everything else is based on the Vedic texts. Even if the Vedic texts were compiled, as we have just referred, only after 500 BC. The Vedic literature is known as Shruti literature. Shruti is a word which means to hear. So the Vedic knowledge has been transmitted across generations through hearing with the help of mnemonics. We'll be discussing all this. Vedic age is also known as the age of Aryans. Who were Aryans? What was the basis of their origin? Were the Aryans indigenous people or they were from outside? We are going to discuss everything in detail. But let me tell you, Aryans they constituted a linguistic group, not an ethnic race, who came based on a number of studies and conclusion, mainly from Central Asian Steppes region. In this chapter, which we'll definitely break into 2 parts, early Vedic age from 1500 BC to 1000 BC and later Vedic age from 1000 BC to 600 BC. We will understand why we have this dual classification and also the element of change and continuity. Always remember this aspect. What is changing and what remains same? Continuity and change. If you understand this, then entire history will appear to you like a story. A story with various twists and turns, a story with many returning points, and a story with points of analysis as well. So if you study every chapter in this way, I'll tell you, you start with the basis background, every chapter. For example, when you study about, say, Vedic age, when you just study about Aryans, start by questioning a very basic thing. Who were Aryans? What is the meaning of the word Aryan? We know that Aryan is a word derived from Arya, means superior or high born. What was their origin? How did they come to India? Why did they come to the Indian subcontinent? Why is there a controversy regarding their indigenous origin? How they expanded from northwest India to the entire Gangetic basin, eventually settling in the Magad region. The nature of their polity in early it was more like a tribal polity, it was more democratic. In later it was more getting towards a centralized polity, but still it was not a monarchy, it was more like a pre-phase of monarchy. Then its economy, what was the basis of change, agency of change. Then its religious belief, society, Varna system, We have to study Varna system, but we also have to study how Varna and caste are related. So when you understand a subject in its entirety, then you get a comprehensive view and maybe then you can make a correlation with the present times. For example, women in Vedic age. A question can be asked. For example, development of agriculture in Vedic age. So always first frame a structure of a chapter and then start feeding information or data, whatever you get. Then you will have a comprehensive view. Let us see a question, what type of questions have been asked with respect to difference between Rig Vedic Aryans. Why Rig Vedic? Because early Vedic age, we only have Rig Veda. So early Vedic age is also known as Rig Veda, Rig Vedic age. And Indus Valley people. What are the statements which are correct or wrong? Rig Vedic Aryans used coat of mail and helmet in warfare, whereas Indus Valley people did not have any evidence of that. Yes, absolutely. We do not have any evidence of weapons from IVC. So if you know this, you can see, yes, it is right. Rig Vedic people knew gold, silver, copper. Indus Valley people knew only copper and iron. Now here, there is no evidence of iron in India. No evidence of iron in India before 6th century BC. That is in agriculture. So we know that Indus Valley people knew the use of copper and bronze as a metallic alloy. The earliest use of iron was not until 1100 BC from megalithic times. So this is wrong. And if this is wrong, definitely second will go. Rig Vedic Aryans had domesticated the horse. This is also wrong. So we can see that second, third, first is the right answer. You can see first is the right answer. Then we have ancient history. We have rise of heterodox sects. Heterodox sects were as many as 62 sects. As many as 62 sects were there. And why they were known as heterodox? Because heterodox here means belonging to Nastika philosophy. That is, these heterodox sects emerged as a reaction. There was problem in the Vedic setup, so certain people were unhappy and they came up with their own belief system. As a reaction to the Vedic belief, thought, and practices. And among these heterodox sects, you have to focus on Buddhism and Jainism mainly. In the recent times, questions from Buddhism and Jainism have been asked mainly with respect to Buddhist and Jaina philosophy. So please take note of this aspect. Questions from Buddhism and Jainism is also being asked with respect to culture and also with respect to impact of Buddhism and Jainism on the society in around 6th century BC. This is something that is interesting. Now, apart from this, you may also have to prepare Ajivikas. Let's see a question, simple question. Even if you don't know, that's fine. Consider the following statements. Now, Mahayana Buddhism. We find that Buddhism was eventually broken up into two halves. Hinayan, which considered Buddha as a great teacher, not as God. They worshipped Buddha or they venerated, respected Buddha through symbols, not through image or idol worship. And in the Hinayan Buddhism, they believe themselves to be closer to the original tenets, hence they are known as the elder school. So deification of Buddha. Yes, Buddha is a deity. Treading the path of Bodhisattvas. Now, Bodhisattvas were the monks of Mahayana Buddhism who believed in social service. They delayed it is said that they delayed their own attainment of moksha for helping others to attain. And the name attain moksha and or nirvana. And the name Mahayana is actually a symbolism of a great vehicle. So in Mahayana Buddhism, it is said that it is possible for even a devotee who is not a monk, even for a follower who is not a monk, to attain nirvana. So it is more accommodative, more inclusive. Image worship. Yes, it is. So all of them are right. I would say this is probably a very easy question. Then we have pre-Mauryan era. In pre-Mauryan era, we have to discuss the rise of 16 Mahajanpat, among which Magad. We have to discuss how and why Magad remained the seat of power in India for a long time, the role of various personalities, important rulers, and then we have to discuss about Alexander's invasion. Mainly, yes, before Alexander there was Persian invasion also, but Alexander's invasion, it was no event. Some say that it was a no event. So we have to understand the consequence. Before Alexander also we have Persian invasion, Darius. Now, let me tell you, the questions which are being asked in the recent times are less of political history. Yes, you should know about the wars and battles, but more than that, it is very important for you to understand the impact, the consequence in terms of economy, culture, society, belief system. So this is something important, and we know that Alexander's invasion in northwest, subordination and defeat of the small principalities paved way or facilitated the task of Chandragupta Maurya, who established the Mauryan Empire. We have to understand the Persian invasion. In fact, I would say the Persian attacks has to be understood in terms of its cultural impact. Kharosthi script, polishing. So how in the Mauryan Empire, Mauryan culture, we have an impact of Greek and the Persians coming up. In fact, it is said that the very idea of erecting polished pillars with inscribed messages was a Persian tradition. However, it is another thing that the Persians had a different way of erecting them, embellishing them, and the motivation or the objective was also very different in Persia than it was in India. So we have to understand the difference also, and how Ashok gave pillar erection a different perspective, made it a strategic tool to consolidate his hold over the empire, not to glorify himself or to develop a personality cult like how Darius had done in Persia. So it was a Persian tradition that after every military victory, they used to erect pillars inscribed with eulogistic messages in their glory. But here, Ashok used to send messages to his officials, to his people who used to talk to them, and it revealed. So it is said that the Ashokan pillars were more about the perspective of Ashok. It appears that Ashokan pillars were like a autobiography of Ashok, telling us or helping us to understand the various facets of this great emperor. And you would not believe that Ashok was virtually unknown in the most recent of times, unless a script in Musky in which alongside Devnam Piyadasi. So the name actually which comes up is not Ashok, but it was Devnam Piyadasi in most of the Ashokan pillars, and only in the Musky pillar for the first time alongside Devnam Piyadasi, Ashok Raja was mentioned. So because of which we were able to study. So we'll understand the significance of pillar sculpture also which developed in the later times. So again you see, with reference to the cultural history of memorizing dynastic, the tales was the profession of who were those who used to actually memorize. Magad is the right answer of this. History from Chandragupta Maurya to the last king Brihadrat. Now let me give you a rider. You don't have to remember the year of accession and decline, but definitely you have to remember what was the important developments, what were the important developments which took place during each of the kings, and especially you have to focus on Chandragupta Maurya and more than that on Ashok Raj. Ashok for his administrative outlook, Ashok for the development of Maurya's consolidation, and Ashok also for his unique spirit or his unique orientation towards managing affairs of administration without an element of warfare. So we have to understand Ashok and Buddhism, and the third aspect is administration, how they were interlinked. how Ashok was able to apply some of the Buddhist principles in his areas of administration. Speaking of administration, no discussion can happen without reference of Arthashastra, the book on statecraft by Kautilya or Chanakya. We also have to focus on the second source, Indica, which although has been lost, but the references of Indica in the later Greek texts by Arian. So Megasthenes, who was ambassador in the court of Chandragupta Maurya, sent by Seleucus Nicator, who was defeated by Chandragupta Maurya, and later they stitched their alliance in the form of matrimonial. Helena was married into the family, and Megasthenes' account, especially of Patliputra, though with its limitations, provides valuable insights into administration, in society, in economy, in municipal administration, in warfare, and also the overall personality of Chandragupta Maurya. So always when you start any chapter, you have to focus on the sources. So what are the sources which helps you to study a chapter? Then you will definitely be able to remember it better way. So with respect to Mauryan administration, in fact, with respect to Mauryas, we have Indica, we have Arthashastra, we have Ashokan pillars, and we also have Buddhist texts. Ashoka's Dhamma. So we have to first of all understand what is the meaning of Dhamma. Was it really or only imbibing and incorporating Buddhist Dhamma into matters of administration, or how it is different? So we have to make a comparative analysis between Ashoka's Dhamma, Buddha's Dhamma. Dhamma is a Prakrit word for Dharma, and the Dharma which is mentioned in Upanishads. Upanishadic Dharma. So you have to definitely make do of all the aspects. We have to correlate all these aspects. Then we will be able to appreciate what is the concept of Dharma. And when you read your world history, you will understand how the element of naturalism, which was one of the pillars of enlightenment, can be correlated to Dharma. Now, society, we have to understand with the help of all the sources the development of society and factors responsible for the decline and disintegration. And after the decline of Mauryan Empire, we have to see what happened in Magad, what happened in North India, Central India, and also in parts of Deccan and South, because that was virtually the entire land. So apart from the extreme north, northeast, and extreme south, all of Indian subcontinent was under the Mauryas. So let us see again a question. Which among the following rulers advised through his inscription? So the moment you see that a person is advising or speaking through inscriptions, you can say that it was Ashok. So many a times you need an exact information, but you understand the perspective, the mindset, you can very easily get the right answer. Now talking about post-Mauryan era, post-Mauryan era was referred to by the British as a dark age. And when we talk about post-Mauryan era, we are talking from 300 BC to 200 AD or CE. Let's use the correct terminology. These 500 years have been referred to by historians such as V.A. Smith as Dark Age in ancient Indian history. But it was not a dark age. Why the British historians refer to them as Dark Age? Because they have this dynastic-based approach for study of history, whether it is ancient, medieval. And apart from the major dynasties, they believe that all other time period was a period of fragmentation and decline. To some extent, this accusation, I would say, is right. But the post-Mauryan era was also a dynamic period, a dynamic age in which India witnessed influx of people from outside. Indo-Greeks had come, foreign ruling dynasties came. Indo-Greeks, Bactrian Greeks, Shakas, Pahlavas, and then the Kushanas. And what is the beauty is that not only they came, they ruled over India, but they helped in establishing good connections, cultural, economic between India and Central Asia and even further west. More than that, speaking of Kushanas who adopted and patronized Buddhism, So we find that the patronage to Buddhism, which starts from 6th century BC, reaching a moral high, materialistic high during Ashok, also receives a boost during this period. And Kushanas introduced, in fact, from the time of Shakas, we find the use of properly minted gold coins. This was the time when India was a major node of Central Asian silk trade. When India enjoyed a favorable balance of trade with respect to the Romans, hence, as Pliny writes in his book Natural History, India was a drain of world's gold. So this period was definitely a very rich culture. And I would suggest that when you are reading this chapter, apart from the personalities, focus on the cultural, materialistic exchange which was happening between India and the West. How did India gain from the Western interaction and how did the West gain from India's contact? So this is very important in terms of coinage, in terms of philosophy. India also borrowed, they also borrowed. In terms of drama, sea navigation, astronomy, again, the list is very long. The list is very long and you have to understand all these aspects because a question can very easily be asked that how the 5 centuries post the decline of Mauryas, the great Mauryas, was a period of cultural exchange between India and the West. And then immediately after the decline of Mauryas in the Magad rule, Magad region came the Shungas, who were champion of Brahmanism. And in fact, during the time of Pushyamitra Shunga, who assassinated the last Mauryan king Brihadrat, who was his military general. Pushyamitra Shunga was the military general, and while one fine morning Brihadrat was inspecting the army, he was backstabbed. So the Buddhist texts write that the rise of Shungas was a dark period in which the Buddhist architecture was destroyed. So we have to understand that yes, this part of the story is partially true. But again, we find that the later Shunga kings such as Agnimitra, they have patronized. In fact, we find a major addition to the Buddhist stupas in the form of the stone layering, in the form of sculpted Toran doors, and in the Deccan region where we will be studying about the Satavahanas and Ikshvakus, we will be studying about Amaravati School of Art. And not only this, the greatest contribution of Indo-Greeks was in terms of introduction of idol worship. And this idol worship was incorporated in Mahayana Buddhism. And from Mahayana Buddhism, it was incorporated into Jainism and even in Hinduism. So we have to understand all these elements in entirety. Besides this, the very important trade connections between India and the world. And why only West? Why not Southeast Asia? Why not India, China? So this period was definitely a dynamic age in which definitely the political model which had been developed from 6th century BC received a jolt. But again, we find that new arenas, new domains opening up. Let's see a UPSC question. Many of the Greeks, Kushans, Shakas embraced Buddhism rather than Hinduism. Now this is an interesting question. Again, you see if the nature of the question, it is more of concept based. So the type of questions being asked in the recent times are such that if you have understood the essence of the chapter, if you have understood the essence of the flow of ancient Indian history, then even if you forget certain facts, you will be able to answer. So let us see. Buddhism was in ascendant at that time. That appears to be a strong reason, but not so. They had renounced the policy of war and violence, definitely not, because the Kushanas continued to wield a large army. Caste-ridden Hinduism did not attract them. No, it's not that because of caste-ridden, it is probably because Buddhism embraced or it was more open. In fact, we find that these Indo-Greeks or Westerners were referred to as Yavanas by the Brahmanas. They were referred to as Yavanas by the Brahmanas, and the Brahmanas, in fact, the Brahmanical religion became more orthodox and conservative. In response to the, I would not say attack, but the threat from outsiders. They felt that if they very easily intermingle or if they are allowed access, it might defile the Brahmanical religion, which was according to them very sacred, very sacrosanct. So the answer is this. Again, without understanding the essence, you would never be able to, and you might probably be confused by a more palatable option A. Then we have the Guptas, the nationalist historians. The nationalist historians call the Gupta age as a golden age. We have to understand why it is called as a golden age. Why the Gupta age is known as a classical age in Sanskrit literature. Speaking of Sanskrit, we have to understand the journey of Sanskrit from a language based on oral traditions to a language which was used not only for religious writings but also for dramas, for various other works. So Sanskrit literature was in religion, it was in science, it was in drama. So multiple field. It was definitely also in terms of law books, smriti literature. So we'll start from here. We'll start from who were the Guptas, because the Gupta title appears to be that of Vaishya. And when you find that a ruler is probably from a Vaishya background, even today, people in parts of eastern UP and Bihar, they have Gupta as a title, referring to the Vaishya. Now again, today we don't have any rigid classification, occupational classification, but the Guptas belong to that section. So we have to start from the origin, and then we will go to political history. In political history again, you again don't have to remember the name of all the kings. You have to do with Chandragupta, the founder. Then we have Samudragupta, Skandagupta, Chandragupta II, and Kumaragupta, mainly because of his role in the establishment of Nalanda University. The administration of Guptas, which was probably not as centralized. The geographical spread was also shrinking. Why it was shrinking, we have to understand. What was the economic limitations or inhibitions because of which the Gupta administration was on one hand a monarchy, but also we have elements of decentralization. What were the elements of decentralization? Why the Gupta monarchs were not as strong like the Mauryas? We have to do a comparative analysis. Because when you see that the Mauryas are centralized, then this is not an absolute term. You have to say that the Mauryas were a centralized economy, centralized administration with reference to the Guptas. And maybe again after Guptas we find further decentralization. So this is how you have to do the comparative study. Society, we'll find Farhen. Farhen talks about Chandalas. The economy, although it has a bright spot in the first phases, then there is an element of decline. Science and technology. Gupta is a golden age because we find tremendous development in science and technology. And then decline and disintegration. Guptas were also patrons of Nagara style of temple architecture. So we have to understand Guptas with reference to culture, society, economy, polity, how Hinduism, very important aspect. We are going to discuss how Hinduism came into being. So there is a lot of difference between Vedic Brahmanism that was there in Vedic age and Hinduism. What changes happened in the Brahmanical culture also. And when I say Brahmanical, I'm not talking about Brahmanas, I'm talking about the entire Vedic setup. What were the changes, what elements came up, and why it is said that Hinduism is more a way of life. What is the meaning of this? So all this has to be understood. The nature of coinage, why there was decline of trade and commerce. So always we try to study a chapter not only in silo-based approach, but with having various linkages. And everything is linked. If you understand history from this point of view, again I say your task becomes much easier. Try to also focus on the works of Kalidas. A question can be asked on Kalidas's literature. Let's see a question. Kulivav and Dronvav. Now this is a difficult question. Let me tell you, this is a difficult question, which is both of them are units for measurement of land. So something that is generally not referred to, but you will always find one or two outliers. The post-Gupta period, this was a period of decline, political decentralization. in North India, who were the rulers, important rulers, or ruling dynasties. You need to have a rough idea. And we'll then focus on Pushyabhutis, from where we have the great Harshavardhan, the last great king in the north. But the political structure of Harshavardhan, though a monarch, was very different from even the Guptas. The Pushyabhutis or Harsha's reign was more like a confederate polity. You have to understand how it was a confederate polity. Now, the meaning of confederate polity, let me rest your all assumptions, was that he ruled through a system of alliance. So, if Harsha's directly ruled territory was this, and then there were allies, then actual influence of Harshavardhan. So, they accepted him as their great leader, but they were not subordinate. But one of the king was the leader. So his influence was over this vast territory. But after Harshavardhan, North India witnessed a complete political decentralization, where we have a large number of small kingdoms. So Harshavardhan's southward march, again we have to study Pulkeshin, the Chalukyan king. We have to understand about Pulkeshin, how this has been referred to Aihole inscription by Ravi Kirti. So inscription study is very important as a source of study. Harshvardhan's era was also a golden period. If we go by the account of Huen Sang, who was Huen Sang, his account. So we have a number of questions being asked from Chinese travelers, Arab travelers, foreign travelers have been asked in both prelims and in mains. And then finally we have the history of South India and Nepal. Definitely the history of South India, where we have lesser number of sources, probably because most of the earlier rulers were based, the political history of India was based in the Magad region, and then it went to the Kannauj region. Also because the formation of large political states was delayed in South India. Now there are a number of causes, but the main cause is that South India has lesser number of fertile tracts which could provide agricultural surplus, and this would be the basis of taxation and the rise of a prominent state. So this was probably the reason. So we have megalithic age, the age where we have the earliest evidence of knowledge of iron. Iron tools were used but not in large number. And megalithic age is known. Megalith means large stone. So they are known for their prominent stone burials. Then in the Sangam era, then in the post-Mauryan times, we have the Sangam era. Why it is known as Sangam era again? Because of the Sangam texts in the Pandyan kingdom. So we have to correlate the earliest history of South India and the later political and the socio-economic history from the time of Pallavas. Sangam texts are very important. They have been asked. So we have to understand how the Sangam texts provide us with the earliest information of polity, economy, society. We have Cholas, Cheras, Pandya dynasties. So all this is mentioned. But in the Sangam text, all the Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas are more like tribal chiefs. So when we will study about Raj and Rajendra, we'll be referring to them as imperial Cholas. So here the polities which are referred in Sangam texts are more like tribal polities. The beginning of political history is from the time of Pallavas, who constructed temples culminating into Dravida temple. So understand the history from perspective of the overall composition. Because if you read only cultural history, you will not get a view of the mindset of the rulers. Why did people throng to the temple in large number? And then what was the basis of emergence of Tamil Bhakti movement, Nayanars and Alvars, and then the Bhakti movement in North India, coming up of Sufism and enriching it. So all this is interlinked. We'll also study briefly about Kharvelas, Satavahanas, Vakatakas, Chalukya, Badami and Kadambas, especially with respect to their cultural history. So very meticulously, the course has been designed in a way so that You can prepare rough notes, and then with one reading, your entire subject is prepared. Let's see some question. With respect to the context of history of India, we have Taniyur villages referred to a single Brahmin or group of Brahmin. Ghatikas are colleges attached to a temple. Yes, this is right. Tanur are not. Here, reference is to Agrahara. It is Agrahara. It is Brahmade. In fact, it is Brahmade are those temples, those lands which are donated to Brahman or group of Brahman. Agrahara is more like a tax-free village, tax-free Brahmanical village. So again we have wrong. So you can see that by eliminating now we already know that we have the revenue which is for the maintenance of the tank. That is wrong. It is not the revenue which is set up for the maintenance of the tank. So answer is 3 only. So if you see the trend of questions being asked from ancient Indian history, it has been going up in the last 3 years, and that is also those questions which are non-cultural questions. If you add it with the questions which come from history and culture, cultural areas, you will get 6 to 7 questions. And if you prepare well, you will be able to answer 4 to 5. That means 10 marks, very important 10 marks, which can make or break your chances of writing the mains. Sources to refer: Ancient India Past, R.S. Sharma, by Choose Study Material, or you can just follow the tablet. So read less and understand more. That is the basic idea. After you have done a question, a chapter, any chapter in ancient India, just ask the right questions. If you are having difficulty to frame the structure, pick up a board, a piece of paper, ask a question. Who were they? Where did they come from? How did they spread? Why are so powerful? What is their economy, politics, structure, social structure, belief system, culture, and then decline. Then when you move to the next chapter, you see how it was different from the earlier ones, why it became different. Then you will understand the linkage, what was the agency of change. In this way, if you are able to prepare an entire flow chart, then believe me, revision of ancient Indian history can happen within a matter of 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, at max 4 hours, and in 4 hours you are earning 10 questions. What more do you expect? Now, how to approach ancient Indian history? I've already said a lot. I'll just sum up. First of all, prepare a structure of the flow of syllabus, not event, the flow of syllabus. Already it is there in your PPT. Then you prepare each segment. In the segment, if you are starting say from Indus Valley, so what was before and what was after? Then you prepare every segment in terms of origin, geography, where they were located, how geography shaped their economy, political structure, social structure, economic structure, belief system, and culture. Prepare this. And then when you move to the next chapter and when you study all these, then definitely focus on why the change. For example, when we study about coinage, we find that the issuing of gold coins declined. The restrictions placed by the Romans on coins, on trade with India, ban. There were political issues such as the attacks, invasions from Central Asia, Hunas. So all these factors, why the change? And why only in economy, in religion also? So when I talk about Hinduism, when I talk about Vasudeva, when I talk about Gopal, Krishna, Narayan, how did these different deities come under the common pantheon of Vishnu? Then how do we correlate the worship of people with Vishnu? Snake worship. All this has to be studied. And then you prepare a flow chart. So structure, then you prepare chapter by chapter and just write keywords. Don't write everything. Don't waste time in preparing notes. Write keywords, polity, 3 lines, 3 words, what signify the polity. Important terminology, name of officials, very important. Next thing is important terminology. Already we are doing, but still I would say do it on your own. And then compare with our comprehensive list that we will do at the end of ancient India, medieval India, and also in our art and culture. Important terminologies. Do that. Finally, when you are done with this, start solving papers. Mock MCQs. If you get a new information, integrate in your notes. Now let me tell you something more. How you have to study. Watch the tablet first, then books. Read one book. When you are done, come to this stage. Note making or synopsis. Don't prepare exhaustive notes because then a lot of time is being wasted. So do this. Then after your notes are done, recollect just by seeing this, whether you are able to recollect or not. If you are unable to recollect, go back to the book, that's portion, whenever you are revising. So at the end of it, maybe the 10 to 12 pages that you have with information also updated from test series from previous years, UPSC questions, you'll have a very, very sound, I would say, strategy, and also you will save the bit of effort. So stop reading the book after 2 times. Don't do that because reading a book takes time. And why students ignore or leave ancient India, medieval India, or any other portion is because they don't have time to revise. And this also creates a sense of anxiety that whatever hard work I had invested in this subject, in this portion, has actually not capitalized in the last moments. So when you are able to revise a portion multiple times, believe me, even if you miss out one or two information, you feel confident. And prelims is about a confidence game. And when you prepare your syllabus, ancient history in this way, methodological way, and then finally after every segment, when you are done with art and culture, add a page of art and culture also, important synopsis. And you see how preparing ancient history, culture, medieval history becomes very interesting. It will give you perspective to quote in your essay, to quote in your society, and also to revise it effectively and fetch right marks. I would not say much because if you are able to implement this, then definitely it is not going to be a challenge for you, even for those who have been introduced to ancient Indian history for the first time. But definitely never ignore any portion of UPSC because you don't know even a single question matters. And we will begin the ancient India portion from the Stone Age. The beginning of civilization on the Indian soil is linked with the Ice Age. The Ice Age during which there was scarcity of resources and it was very difficult for man, for animals to move from one place to the other. However, it is said that after the Pleistocene era, so the history is about geography also affecting not only resource generation but the movement of masses in different parts of the world. So it is said that the Pleistocene era was the last instance of an ice age. Pleistocene era was succeeded by the Holocene era. And during the Holocene, we see beginning of warming, beginning of melting of ice, which later helped in domestication of plants. When I use the term domestication of plant, I am referring to simply agriculture. So this helped in agriculture, and with more agriculture, with more food resources, there was a case of population rise. Along with it, the rise of animal kingdom. Some of the animals were hunted, while others were domesticated. It starts from the point of UPSC syllabus. We begin from Stone Age. Now there has been different approaches of classifying history, which we will be discussing in our forthcoming sections. And one of the earliest ways of classifying history was on the basis of usage of tools. So in the beginning stages, when there was no knowledge of metal, whatever tools were used, they were made of stone. So it is said that the earliest man used stones of various sizes, and the stone was mainly used for chopping of meat, for cutting of meat, and also hunting. In the earlier times, if we talk about Stone Age, in the earliest of the times, the Paleolithic Age and the Mesolithic Age, when we see a transition from hunting gathering towards agriculture, most of the resources were captured by the community and consumed by the community. So because of which the population was very limited. So we try to understand that gradually community started, and then they, on the basis of hit and trial and favorable geoclimatic conditions, that is the Holocene era, they began to domesticate plants. So it is said that if Paleolithic age, during which the mode of food gathering was hunting and collection of raw plants, fruits, the geoclimatic condition, the climate was that of Pleistocene era. Pleistocene era, a time when there was no favorable circumstance for agriculture. Whereas the Neolithic era, which we will be discussing, pertaining to the Neolithic era pertaining to the beginning of agriculture, and even the Mesolithic, they were in a time when the climate, when the overall average temperature, they began to rise, resulting in warming, resulting in melting of ice and producing precipitation, which also helped in growth of plant. So we will understand that how the earliest history of man with respect to India was about a very primitive community. When I say primitive, I mean the earliest of the community, which it did not know about the resources it had. It was only concerned with the fulfillment of its basic interests in terms of food, in terms of shelter, and also to an extent defense or avoiding threat of wild animals. So these stones which were used by the earliest of the communities, they were mainly obtained from riverbed. And because of which we find that many of the earliest communities, they were close to the river sources, also not only for procuring pebbles as a natural tool, but also because river provided them with ready supply of water, and they used to reside in caves. They used to reside in natural caves, and accidentally and also because of favorable circumstances, they started progressing. That is the history of beginning of civilization in India. If we talk about how we did know so much about them, especially at a time when they did not know how to read, how to write, and in fact communication was mainly on the basis of sign, then we definitely know that we are talking about a time. We are talking about a time when historical evidence was mainly on the basis of archaeology. So before we move to know more, to explore more about how did community life begin on the Indian subcontinent, let us briefly understand how history has been studied and how the historians, archaeologists have known so much about a time when people even did not understand themselves. So we are talking about the various sources for the study of ancient history. From the point of view of UPSC syllabus for GS, in the recent times we see a number of questions getting asked on archaeological sources. For example, in 2017, a question which invited a lot of debate, I would not say controversy, was that whether Indus Valley people knew about the horse, whether there was a general awareness of the horse or not. What do the Ashokan inscription mean for not only a historian but for the general public? What have the travelers said about the ancient times? The study of history, which is a branch of knowledge associated with the analysis of past event, is incomplete without understanding the sources. Because if there is no source, then history would be more like a mythology. So what differentiates archaeology is based on belief and also on the idea of oral transmission of knowledge over generations. Oral transmission of knowledge over generations. There have been instances when certain information or fact which has been stated in mythological sources have also been validated by archaeological and literary sources. However, from the point of view of UPSC history, we will focus only on those events of history which has been validated by concrete historical sources. What are these sources? What are these sources and how we have been using these sources to our advantage? Let us understand. So the first type of source which is very important are the archaeological sources. Archaeology, it is a branch of science which is based on analysis of previous events through the most important aspect, because in every historical analysis there is analysis of previous events but through material resources which belong to the past. So through the excavations and through the study of these material resources which were used in the past. So in archaeology we study about different resources. So we study about tools, we study about burials, we study about bones, we study about the remains of plants, the fossil remains, and we also study about jewels, jewelry, pottery, weapons. In fact, we will classify tools and weapons together. So the list is endless. And even monuments. And there have been multiple inferences being drawn. For example, if I consider this pen as an archaeological resource, then it is highly likely that the same pen would be inferred, or two different archaeologists can make two inferences, deductions out of the same tool. So we find that with respect to a same archaeological evidence, there have been more than one inferences. However, over a period of time, the archaeologists, the scientists, the anthropologists, when I say anthropology, it is the study of ancient man. So they came to certain conclusion about how and what does any particular archaeological source say. For example, let us begin with tools. If we talk about tools, the nature of a tool speaks a lot about its use. So the microwear analysis, that is the analysis of the surface of a tool, it talks a lot about its possible potential use. For example, if it is pointed, definitely it was used for cutting. If it is more round and of larger surface, it was used for chopping. And also the nature of the material, the nature of the rock, it also speaks a lot about the distribution of the company. For example, if we find an igneous tool, then definitely they were close to a resource from where volcanic eruption was happening. Although we do not have an active volcano on the mainland India, the only volcano is in the barren island of Andaman and Nicobar, but we know that for a long time in the Deccan Tract there were a number of fissures from which eruptions used to happen. So rock material, the analysis of rock material also, it tells us a lot about the distribution of a community. Over a period of time, we see that the tools became more refined, smaller in shape and more sturdy in terms of its material strength. So as it is a general nature, just imagine a scenario 15 years back when the first mobile phone came, it was much sturdy and it was very heavy. Now we have very thin mobile phone. It is highly likely that in the future we may have mobile devices or electronic devices which would be not much thicker than a single page. So that is how mankind has also been evolving with respect to the usage of the tools. Mound. What is a mound? Over a period of time, when any community is there, for example, just imagine after the ruin of Harappan community, Harappan site, over a period of time because of deposition of layers of mud silt, it was covered and people even started residing. We know that many of the Vedic sites are located beneath the dense populated regions of Uttar Pradesh. So sometimes by luck and also because of the scarce population, the archaeologists figured out a mound. So mound looks like this. It looks like this, and then they started carrying out the vertical excavation. years, then definitely it will gather dust. It is possible that after a few more years, there will be deposition of mud here. So what will remain after say 2-3 decades, if it is left unattended or undisturbed, it will be like a mound. So in a mound, vertical excavation, the lower you reach, the deeper you reach a more primitive community. Vertical excavation, it speaks about the different ages. So the earliest times, in the earliest community, it would be at the last, it would be at the bottommost, while the most recent one will be at the top. So it talks about the time scale of a community. Whereas the horizontal excavation, it will talk about the spread. For example, at a particular depth, now you want to excavate horizontally to see how far it was spread. So it talks about the horizontal spread at a time period. There has to be a balance between vertical and horizontal excavation. Burials, we'll be discussing a lot about burials. So in India, in Hinduism, we have a practice of cremation. But in the earlier times, the dead ones, the dead bodies were buried along with a number of goods also. So burials give us a lot of perspective about the earliest communities. First of all, in the earlier times, the dead ones were buried with grave goods. That is, along with the clothes in which the body was wrapped up. If there was no cloth, there were certain goods such as pots filled with grains. Sometimes some agricultural tools were there. Metal tools also came. Sometimes jewels were there. It was believed by many that people had a life after death. So the grave goods, it gives us information about the belief, the perception of life after death. They had a perception of life after death, and also the different nature of grave goods in these burials also spoke about which community or which family might have been more prosperous. Because if a prosperous man died or a woman died, definitely there were more refined goods, such as jewelry was there, and also the quantity would have been higher. Whereas in the case of a poor family, the amount of grain, the size of pottery, the aesthetics of the pottery, it would have been lesser. So grave goods also tells us about the material culture and the possible social stratification. The possible social stratification. Another source of historical study, archaeological study, were the bones of animals and humans. So we know that earlier humans who have also had a common lineage to the monkeys, they also had a tail. But over a period of time, when man became bipedal, it became erect, it was walking on its two legs, then the use of tail, which was used for clinging to a tree, was not there. So as Charles Darwin writes in his book Origin of Species, any human structure or any limb of a body, if it has not been used for a long time, it has lost its utility, it will gradually fade out. So today all we have is a remnant cocaix bone. So at the back, which only tells us that once we had tails also. So over a period of time, humans, they began to have a different body structure also on the basis of the type of functions they perform. For example, in a hunting community where you were expected to run fast to catch an animal, definitely the legs will be more sturdy. For example, in the later agricultural community where you don't have to run, the legs will be, or the leg bones will not be that sturdy. So here, depending upon the use, depending upon the function, the size and the strength of bone was also. And also, with respect to animals also, some of the animals were domesticated. So in a case of a domesticated animal, it does not have to hunt for its food. For example, a dog which has been kept as a pet. Now the dog is assured that the master will offer food for number of times during the day. So the dog does not have to worry, and hence in these type of domesticated animals, the bones were not as sturdy. But compare a wild dog. A wild dog will have to hunt. So in the case of the wild dog, the bone structure will be more sturdy. When I say sturdy, I mean it will be more powerful. Also, with respect to cattle, because over a period of time they were tired, so there was an impression on the neck. So analyze the bones to figure out that which were animals which were directly employed in agriculture, which were domesticated for recreation, and which of the animals were hunted and consumed for food. The floral remains and even the bones with the help of what is known as carbon 14 analysis. We have been reading about carbon 14 radioactive analysis. This tells us about the time frame. The other type of resource which was later used were the literary resource. They were the literary resource. When I say literary, I mean books, inscriptions, or anything which is associated with reading and writing. The earliest man, they did not know how to write. In fact, not until Indus Valley civilization we have any evidence of a script. Script is a written form. But unfortunately, the Indus Valley script has yet not been decoded, understood, read. So the earliest evidence of a script which has been understood, which has helped us to understand about the knowledge which was preserved during that time was during the age of Buddha, and that is the Brahmi script. So the earliest script is the Indus script, and the earliest decoded or let's say deciphered script is the Brahmi script during the age of Buddha. So let's say around 600 BC. However, the Brahmi script, it has been referred in the Buddhist texts that around the age of when Buddha was there, people knew about writing and they used to write in Brahmi script. But archaeologically, it has been verified only in the Ashokan inscriptions. So Ashokan inscriptions, we have actually concrete evidence of the first use of Brahmi script. But we definitely trust the Buddhist sources. At least they knew about it. Literary sources along with archaeological sources only add to our knowledge. So it is said that even if the Vedas were not written, because they were earlier transmitted orally over generations, and it is only from 500 BC that the writing, the compilation of Vedas started, the Vedic age is also known as a literary age. Because besides the archaeological evidence, which in the case of Vedic age, the age of Aryans was limited, the literary source, the literary knowledge which was preserved in the Vedas, which we will discuss more in the Vedic age chapter, it only added to our knowledge. Now people wrote on multiple surfaces and for different purpose also. So literary sources can be classified in multiple ways. If I have to say, there is twofold classification of literary sources. It can be a religious text, it can be a religious source such as Vedas, such as Buddhist texts, such as Jaina texts. So we have associated with various religions. We also have secular sources, Kautilya's Arthashastra, Ashokan inscriptions, play, poetry, drama, so all this, biographies, etc. So all these are the secular sources because the purpose was not to disseminate, to popularize the religious beliefs of any particular group. We will leave this classification of literary sources for our art and culture segment. But definitely we have discovered various sources on which, various surfaces also, on which the writing was done. One of the surface which was used for monetary transaction was coins. So although on coins there was limited space, that is a problem. How much do you see? But the images on the coins, many a times the images were of the king, many a times the images were of gods, goddesses. So all this speaks about one, the personality of the king. In one of the coins, Samudragupta is depicted as playing Veena. So we generally tend to associate Samudragupta, who is known as the Napoleon of India, with military conquests. So don't worry, we will be covering that also in our Gupta chapter. But for the depiction of Samudragupta playing Veena, we also know that he was interested in music. In the Kushana coins, the Kushanas depicted the images of not only Greek gods but also later Indian gods also. So they also were very cosmopolitan in their outlook. So they not only patronized the Greek culture, the Greek religious belief, but later they became Indianized. So this gives us personal information and also the outlook of the day. So we will be doing the coins as a separate segment in our art and culture. Some of the coins also had dates. So not all the coins, but some of the Gupta coins and some of the coins of the Indo-Greeks had date also. Coins associated with script, it gave us a view that what type of language and what type of script was used by the rulers and by the community for writing. With respect to literary source, the greatest, I would say the greatest and the most valuable besides the books are the inscriptions. What is an inscription? For example, if I have a tablet, just imagine that you have a tablet like surface made of wood or metal or even of rock, and you inscribe messages, or the messages that have been found on various pillars. Allahabad pillar inscription, the pillar inscriptions of Ashoka. So the inscriptions provide us with plethora of information. If we have to say that had it not been for the inscriptions and also the linkage of these inscriptions about Ashoka, we would have never known that who was this Dev-Nam Priya. Thus, Ashokan inscriptions and the vast knowledge they contain, it appears that it is more like an autobiography. So the inscriptions speak about military conquests. The inscriptions reveal about the personal outlook. The distribution of the inscriptions also provide information about the extent of the empire. We will be referring to various inscriptions not only on pillars, on tablets, but also on the biodegradable palm leaves which have been referred to. Unfortunately, many of the inscriptions on paper in the medieval times and the inscriptions on palm leaf could not survive. We also hear of various important metal inscriptions on copper plate. So when land grants were given, this entire process, or who was the beneficiary, who was the donor, all this was recorded in the copper plate inscription. So we will be referring more to inscriptions. Inscriptions also give us a brief view about the level of literacy of the masses. The other very important source, in fact UPSC has been asking a number of questions from this segment of literary source, not only in prelims but also in mains, are the travelers' accounts. So various travelers attracted by India's diversity, India's vastness, India's richness, they came and some of them settled in India for even more than a decade. They came to collect resources that such as the Buddhist texts. Sometimes they were invited, sometimes they came as ambassadors. So the travelers' account, when the travelers saw what was around them, despite the fact that they had limited knowledge, they had no awareness or they did not understand the local language, they were able to interpret based on translators and interpreters, and they present a rich account of the times when they stayed in India. From the point of view of history, the traveler's account is very important because the travelers, besides the king, queen, the wars, the travelers spoke about the life of common people. So in the recent times when the focus of history has shifted towards what is known as subaltern history, that is towards the life of commoners, the emphasis on the traveler's account is more because the travelers such as Fahed talks about the Chandals, which is not anywhere mentioned with respect to the Gupta age. Fahed talks about the condition of women. Huin San talks about the condition of Brahmins, the condition of Buddhist monks. Al-Biruni says that how Shudras were improving their status whereas Vaishyas were declining. So these travelers' account is very important because they speak about those people who could not afford to make historians write for them. So please pay a lot of attention, and we will be having a separate segment again on travelers' account in our art and culture segment. So now, having briefly understood the various sources, and I would not spend a lot of discussion, a lot of energy on that because we'll be applying these sources. We'll be applying and we'll be using these sources during various time frame of ancient and medieval history. Let us begin with Stone Age. So Stone Age was a time when man knew very less about their environment, when the climate was not conducive for agriculture, and they thrived on hunting and on gathering raw fruits and sometimes roots also. They used to reside in natural caves, and mostly they were found near the riverine basin. And it is seen that the general pattern of migration, because it was a nomadic community. It was a nomadic community in the Stone Age. When I say nomad, a nomadic community, I mean a community which is constantly on the move. This nomadic community started moving based on the availability of resources. So when they had exhausted all the animal and the plant resources in an area, they moved to a new region. So it was constantly on the go, and also sometimes because of the prevailing climatic conditions. Such as if there was a flood, they were forced to move to a highland region. We see that the earliest pattern of migration was generally along the coastal belt. They did not venture much into the deep forests because of the fear of unknown, and also they did not want to stay much away from water, as during the earliest of the time there was no way in which they could store water. Pottery came only as late as 9000 BC in Chopani Mandi. So in the time of Stone Age, there was mostly hunting, gathering, and because hunting, gathering provided for limited resources, hence the population size of a band, it was a band society, people with say a population of even less than 100, they used to stay together. So the population size was even less than 100 per band, and they used to reside in caves. Definitely the average human life, it was very less because of food scarcity and because of high child mortality. So now let us understand that how did, from a hunting gathering community in a nomadic lifestyle, they progressed towards a sedentary or a settled agricultural community. Before we delve deeper, let us have a brief understanding of how history in the earliest time have been classified. It is said that the earliest history was that of a prehistoric age, when the evidence was only archaeological. When the evidence was only archaeological. So if I talk about Paleolithic age, if I talk about Mesolithic age, Chalcolithic age, and even I talk about Neolithic age, all that we have are tools, animal bones, fossils, and sometimes in the Neolithic times we have some remains of pottery as well. This was with respect to the Stone Age. So the Stone Age falls under the category of prehistoric age. Now this was the proto-historic age, in which the evidence was archaeological. There was some literary evidence also, but unfortunately the literary evidence has not been understood, or it has not been deciphered. So the literary evidence which really has helped us is from other sites, from the contemporary. I am talking about Indus Valley civilization. So in the Indus Valley civilization, one thing that we know, that the Indus Valley people had rich trade relations with the Mesopotamians. And the Mesopotamians have also referred something about the Indus traders, merchants, their trade stations in their own texts. And we have been able to, in fact, in the West Asia, Mesopotamian texts have been deciphered. So the literary reference, which is a foreign contemporary source. Here the foreign contemporary source is the Mesopotamian source. So the Mesopotamian texts, they tell us. It is from the Vedic times when we have both literary and archaeological sources. So it is said that the beginning of history or the historic age is from Vedic age onwards. That is from 1500 BC, and later times we have both archaeological and literary sources. And under the category of archaeology and literary source, the number of resources have only been increasing over the period of time. So with more and more tools, we have learned how to analyze and come to a more closer analysis, a more closer deduction of these sources. With respect to tools, as I have already said, that the prehistoric age, this prehistoric age was a stone age. So during the time of Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Neolithic, stones were used as tools. However, the nature of tools and the size of the tools, the shape of the tools also, it was evolving. If I talk about the time period, then the bronze and the copper age. So Chalcolithic culture. Don't worry, we'll be discussing about both. Chalcolithic, chalcos is derived from copper. So in the Chalcolithic culture of Central India, Maharashtra region, Southeast Rajasthan and parts of MP, we find that people were aware of the knowledge of copper. Copper which was and which continues to be obtained, that is the Khetri mine in the present day Rajasthan. So the IBC people, the Indus Valley people were aware of the use of copper and bronze. So many a times IBC is also known as the Bronze Age. It is an alloy which is obtained by mixing copper and tin. And Copper Age, it is pertaining to the Chalcolithic culture. It pertains to the Chalcolithic culture. The IBC people, the Chalcolithic people did not know about the use of iron. In fact, in the Vedic texts, even if iron has been referred, so in the Vedic texts, there is reference of iron. There is reference of what is known as ayas. Ayas is a Hindi word for metal. There is a reference of Krishna ayas. So Krishna, who is a prominent Hindu deity, is also associated with dark color, dark skin complexion. So the reference of Krishna ayas, it has been seen by the historians as a reference to a black metal, that is iron. However, we have no archaeological concrete sources to prove that these Vedic people actually knew about iron. So they used iron. The first evidence of iron can be found from the megalithic communities. So megalithic communities of mainly South India from 1100 BC. They used to use some iron, and the iron was mainly used as weapon. The transformative change, or what is known as the Iron Revolution, in the history of mankind in India was only, so if I talk about iron in agriculture, which created a type of revolution, which we will see in our later segment, this happened only from 600 BC. So it would be safe to say that the actual knowledge of iron, which would be used in various areas in agriculture as tools and even for building, it began from 600 BC onwards. Now with respect to the classification of Stone Age, the chapter which we are going to discuss, we have the Old Stone Age, the earliest times when the stone tool was larger in size and it was more about pebbles, large pebbles. The stone which was used was core tools, so something which looked like this, and a stick was sometimes tied to it somehow. So this is the core tool. This is a Paleolithic. Paleos, the word Paleos means old stone. Mesolithic age. Mesolithic age is many ways, it is an age of transition. We will see how. It is an age of transition in economy, because now from hunting gathering we are moving towards agriculture. In the concluding phase of Mesolithic, we see the beginning of agriculture. We see transition from a nomadic community, because now with the knowledge of agriculture, with the knowledge of domestication of plant, the community does not have to necessarily move constantly in search of food. Now it could locate itself, it could position itself near a fertile plain or an agricultural land, and it could sow crops, it could plant crops year on year at the very same spot. So from a nomadic community, it moved towards a settled community. We'll see more about Mesolithic age, that it was also the period when domestication of animals began, the period when the use of pottery began. So Mesolithic age is the age of transition. And then the Neolithic age, which is the new stone age, which was the agricultural age. The age of agriculture, and everything that is associated with the beginning of a community life is seen in the Neolithic age. It is interesting to note that Mesolithic and Neolithic fall under the geoclimatic time scale of Holocene. No wonder that Holocene, which is associated with warming of climate, with more rainfall, provided for the transition, whereas Paleolithic is associated with the Ice Age, that is the Pleistocene, with the Ice Age which is known as the Pleistocene. found near river basins. Hence, we find that most of the earliest Paleolithic communities, the earliest hunting-gathering communities were found near rivers. And definitely the additional advantage not only of tools but also of providing water as a means of survival. They used to live in naturally available caves. So natural caves, Paleolithic age or the old stone age using stone as a means of tool. This was the age when the society was a nomadic hunting gathering community. This was a nomadic hunting gathering community. And if we talk about the time scale, then various anthropologists, archaeologists, they talk about the Paleolithic age as back as 5 lakh years. So as back as 5 lakh years to 10,000 BC. So this was the time when, if we talk about geoclimatic conditions, what was the climate like, the geoclimatic condition? It was known as the ice age. So in an ice age, the condition is very extreme for the growth of flora and fauna. So because of limited flora and fauna, the available resource, because if the plant resource is less, definitely the animal subsisting, the herbivorous would be less. If the herbivorous is less, then the carnivorous and the omnivorous would also be less. And hence, because of limited resources, agricultural knowledge was yet to arrive. The size of a nomadic gathering, hunting gathering community was never greater than, it was never greater than 100. And we find that malnutrition as one of the primitive cause means lack of food. We are not talking about the nutrient balance, because recent studies have said that the nutrient balance was much better than the later agricultural times when the food habits were more inclined towards certain cereals. So we are not talking about nutrient balance, but we are talking about the basic availability of food. When there is no basic availability of food, the question of nutrient deficiency does not arise. So the size was small and they were very primitive, a very primitive man who had just learned about how to stay together. They had understood about and they were learning constantly, as Harari says in his book Homo Deus. They were conducting trial, hit and trial method with respect to a number of things. So once they discovered spark and then they understood how to cause fire, they accidentally dropped a piece of meat on fire and it tasted better. It was easily to digest. So they understood how to bake meat. So they also figured out that the wild animals were pretty scared of fire. So they resided in natural caves. They started with their hit and trial and they were gradually improving over generations. So if we talk about the Paleolithic age from the point of view of archaeology, because this belongs to a prehistoric era when the archaeological excavations are a sole source of historicity. So we know about them from archaeological sources only. So on the basis of archaeological excavation, the Paleolithic age has been divided into 3 strata. The earliest, that is the lower Paleolithic age. Then we have the middle Paleolithic age and the upper Paleolithic age, that is the most recent, because the most recent will be at the top. It is at the upper Paleolithic age that we find some evidence of painting. We find some evidence of cave paintings. So even in those times, they had some sense of art. So we hear of the upper Paleolithic age as the beginning of art forms, though on a very limited scale. So with this in mindset, let us get into more detailed understanding of the Paleolithic Old Stone Age. Talking about where have we found the earliest evidence of humans in India? Going by anthropological study, the Hathnora man discovered in the Narmada Valley points out to the most primitive of our ancestors. In Day-1, we also have evidence. In Day-1, we have Rajasthan, near the Sikar district, Day-1 was a place which was earlier blessed with rivers. Not in this time, much later, when the wetter phase will arrive from 9000 BC. We will see. We have Bhimbetka. Bhimbetka is mostly associated with Middle Paleolithic and also with the Mesolithic age. We learn a lot about the community life of Mesolithic times from the cave paintings of Bhimbetka. We have in river Narmada a number of sites. We have Latur. So these are some of the sites from where earliest evidence of man have been found. So we divide the Paleolithic culture into the rest of India, Acheulean culture and the Sohan Valley culture. So the Paleolithic culture, or on the basis of use of tools, we find two distinct types of tools used. So Sohan culture, which is associated with river Sohan and its tributary. So Sohan culture in Pakistan, and rest of India we have the Acheulean culture. We have the Acheulean culture in rest of India. So this is also one of the ways of classifying the Paleolithic society, the Paleolithic age, on the basis of regional differentiation of stone tools. So talking of the earliest, we have the lower Paleolithic age between 5 lakh to 1 lakh BC. In the earliest times, they used core tools. Core tools shaped like this, which was made into a hand axe, which was made into clivers. They used these for hunting of animals. They used these for chopping and cutting of meat. So we find the most primitive tools were used here, and they were of large size, which also impeded with the swift movement of the carriers. We have in Bori Latu, in Eastern Ghats, Central India, Bhimbetka region, Sohan Valley. So these are the place from where the lower Paleolithic sites have been found. This was a period of intense glaciation, like also in the Middle Paleolithic age. In the Middle Paleolithic age, that is between lakh to 40,000 BC, again the conditions were very extreme. But now the size of tools are decreasing. So we have flakes. What are flakes? Example, if this is a tool, then you break it. The smaller and the more pointed one with its surface, this is known as a flake. This is known as a flake. So we have flake core tools. We have more sites in the Belan Valley of Uttar Pradesh. So please note that many of the sites in Paleolithic times are in the vicinity of rivers. We have Day-1, so river valley of Son, Narmada, Tungabhadra. So because of the proximity to, also because near the river you have more flora, you have more plants which attracted the animals, so they could be easily hunted. Animals used to come to drink water at night, so they could be easily spotted and captured. So all these factors went behind selection of river valleys as a prominent site for inhabitation. Upper Paleolithic age, between 40,000 to 10,000, we have the beginning of some rituals. So it is said that near Patne in Maharashtra, ostrich eggshells have been discovered. So ostrich eggshells, please make this correction, P-A-T-N-E, not Patna. So Patna in Maharashtra, ostrich eggshells have been discovered, and the ostrich eggshells were used for making jewelry. So definitely this is the earliest evidence of craft work. In terms of tools, we see smaller tools which are known as flint. We also have evidence of bone tools. So bone tools, probably the hunted animals, they noted that these pointed bones could be used further for hunting. Flint is a finer tool which is smaller in size. You can see they are more pointed tools. So gradually the flints, the microliths of the Mesolithic time would be used as arrowheads. So by now they began to learn the knowledge of projectile came into being, and then they gradually discovered the art of making bow and arrow, by which they could hunt animal from a far off distance without jeopardizing their own life. Paleolithic society, what will be the nature of a society where there is no agriculture? If there is no agriculture, if the resources are very limited, definitely it will be a tribal society. A society in which all the men, because they are considered to be more physically apt to do risky tasks such as hunting of animals, such as capturing of animals, they will be working with women in cases where they are collecting the natural raw fruits. So we find that division of labor did not happen because of institution. Because when we talk about division of labor, the first thought that comes to our mind is Varna system. So in the Rig Vedic Purushukta hymn, according to Varna, occupational differentiation has been done. But that is applicable in a agricultural community. For example, in the present day society, based on our aptitude, based on the exams we qualify, we are assigned or allotted, we are fixated to a particular career. But what about a time when there are very limited resources? So when there is a limited resource, the entire community is inclined, the entire community is committed towards the mobilization of that resource. So definitely the scope for recreation, the scope for thinking anything apart from survival would be very limited. And in a community where there are limited resources, where they will survive from hand to mouth, definitely there cannot be an existence of state. So all discussion of state, institution, social norms, everything will arise only with the advent of agriculture. Because the basic premise for the existence of state or ruling authority is that authority will manage surplus resource. So that was not the case. So here we find that because there are limited resources, so because resources are very limited, hence survival is the goal of life. Survival will be the goal of life. And all efforts will be mobilized towards collection of these resources. Speaking of the Paleolithic society, which was a band-based society. When we say band society, means say 100 people are there. They are residing in a space where there are animals, natural fruits, roots are there. When the resources are exhausted, they will move to a new spot, all in a band. So stay together, die together. So that is the idea. And whoever died, they were either buried or they were left to perish. So even the concept of burial was not there because they did not have the understanding, the evolution of human mind was not to understand that a person who has died has to be safely disposed of. So it was a band society, it was more like a tribal society in which everybody saw each other as a part of a larger community. The concept of or the institution of family was not there. We don't know, but definitely on the basis of adult consent, men and women would have procreated and produced their progeny. Let me say that there was a sexual division of labor. So there was a sexual division of labor, in which the men were responsible for hunting and for defending the community from wild animals because they were considered to be physically sturdy, and the women, they were associated with collection of raw fruits, roots, and also child rearing and taking care of elderly. Now there is no concept of household chore, there is no concept of cooking because agriculture is not there. At max, women would have baked the hunted meat. So also on the basis of dietary pattern, we can also find out whether who was more important, a man or a woman. So in a society where more of plants, fruits, roots were consumed, it is but natural that the women played a more significant role in collection of food. So they would have a better status. In a society which relied more on hunting, the men would be seen superior. And elderly were considered to be liability. So also on the basis of age and gender. So age, because the elderly who were not fit for hunting, they were seen as liability. So the old were liability. But we don't have any evidence of killing of the old because of the scarcity. So maybe they waited for them to die. climatic conditions from the Iron Age, Pleistocene era, when there was very difficult for even the minor growth of plants, to a Holocene, a warm humid era, when there was a transition, the mankind also witnessed a transition in its socio-economic community lifestyle. This age is the Mesolithic age. Mesolithic age, if we break this word, if we discuss the etymology, mesos means middle and lithic means stone age. So with Pleistocene to Holocene, Holocene which began around 10,000 years ago, we see warm and humid climate. And this warm and humid climate provided favorable conditions for growth of first plants and later based on plants the other animals. So with the growth of plants, a situation, an opening was created for the beginning of agriculture. And in 7000 in Mehergarh, Balochistan region, we have the earliest evidence of the growth of barley as the first food crop. So this age, which is also known as the age of transition, or at least the faint beginning of agriculture. Mesolithic age is the age sandwiched between the earlier Paleolithic hunter-gatherers food economy to the later Neolithic, that is an agricultural economy. So we have the blend of both. We have hunting-gathering as a predominant activity which is for livelihood, for survival, and also the faint beginning of agriculture. So we have transition from a nomadic hunting-gathering economy to hunting-gathering was there, but also beginning of agriculture. And with agriculture, now the headache or the constant pressure to move towards new food resources was also eliminated. So we have a settled community. And with settled community, you don't have to worry every time for your food. When you can manage by working for 7-8 months during the conducive period for agriculture and make do without working much for the next 3 months, then definitely you have scope for recreation. So this recreation was expressed, it was manifested in the form of cave paintings. So we have cave paintings, we have evidence of some paintings in Upper Paleolithic age also. But now these paintings were full-fledged. The paintings of Bhimbetka, a prominent site in the Raisen district of Madhya Pradesh, is a designated UNESCO World Heritage Site. And the name Bhimbetka has been derived possibly from the Indian mythology when Bhim, one of the great Pandavas, resided with his demoness wife for a number of years. So Bhimbetka paintings tell us a lot about the community life. We will be discussing in detail about the Bhimbetka paintings in our art and culture painting segment. So we also find that alongside cave paintings with agriculture, we have the evidence of pottery. At a site known as Chupani Mandu, around 9000 BC, we have the earliest evidence of pottery. And with a community life, now animal was not only consumed as food, but some animals were domesticated. And no marks for guessing which was the first domesticated animal. From Adamgarh and Bagor, we have the earliest evidence of domestication of dog. So we find that many of the practices that today we have, they had their faint beginning in the Mesolithic age. So it would be right to say that the Mesolithic age laid the foundation of the later community life. And UPSC has been asking a number of questions. In 2015 mains examination, a question was asked on the historicity, on the historical knowledge being provided by the Mesolithic paintings. So as we discussed, from the Pleistocene to Holocene, which began around 10,000 years, we have expansion of flora and fauna. And later on, some of these flora, that is plant, were domesticated. When I use the terminology domestication of plants, I am simply referring to agriculture. And with growth of more plant resources, first we have herbivores, plant-consuming animals, and later the carnivores and also a class of omnivores emerged. And also with conducive conditions, now man started shifting and settling in the more fertile northern plains. In the Paleolithic era, we found that most of the life was centered around the riverine basins having a number of caves. They resisted from venturing into the heartland, from venturing into the forested regions. Now, this was not the case. It was mainly on the basis of considerations of agriculture supporting topography that they started shifting to northern regions. So we have seen that with the faint beginning of agriculture from 7000 BC onwards. But what is to be noted with respect to Mesolithic age is that it did not have full-fledged. So when we say Mesolithic, we are talking about the hybrid culture, a culture having elements from both, from the earlier Paleolithic and the later Neolithic. We have the earliest evidence of domestication of plants from Mehergarh in Balochistan and also from the Sambhar Lake in Rajasthan a bit later. Recently a book was published, Early Indians, the book by Tony Joseph. It discusses in detail about the evolution of agriculture in India. There was a view, a very dominant view, that agriculture was introduced in India by people from outside. Mostly people from the Iranian plateau, that is the Iranian highlands in Central Asia. These people came in various strands and introduced the knowledge of agriculture. But on the basis of DNA analysis, as it is also mentioned in the book Early Indians by Tony Joseph, agriculture or agricultural knowledge was indigenous in India. That is, it developed locally by it and tribe. But definitely, there was influx, there was borrowing of agricultural practices from Central Asia. Later on, when we discuss about Indus Valley civilization, we would understand that how from Mehergarh in Balochistan region, which started with the earliest crop, that is barley, and later picked up wheat, how from these rudimentary primitive agricultural settlements villages emerged, and later with more technology, with trade and commerce, these villages, they graduated to full-fledged urban centers. So that is the history of the beginning of agriculture, the faint beginning in the Mesolithic age, in the age of transition, leading to first the full-fledged agricultural age, that is Neolithic, leading again to the Indus Valley civilization. So domestication of animals from Adamgarh in Madhya Pradesh and Bargor in Rajasthan. Now, a point for GS students. They often wonder how many sites we have to memorize. It is important that the sites which are in news, current affairs, and these sites which are very specific, which have unique about them, they have to be memorized, they have to be kept in mind. So now, in earlier times, we had seen in the Paleolithic time when the community was constantly on the move and somebody died. Then they left that person, that dead body to decompose naturally. They did not have the resources, the wherewithal to bury them. There was no concept of burial practice. But now with a sedentary community, with settled lifestyle, we find the beginning of grave burial. From Bargor in Rajasthan, from Langanaj in Gujarat, and also from Bhimbetka. And the grave burials speak a lot about the belief system. In the initial burials of the Mesolithic times, mostly dead bodies were buried. They were either primary burial, in which after death the entire body is buried, or sometimes they are also secondary burial. So we find that in India we had primary burial, entire body, or secondary burial, in which the body after decomposition, or sometimes in later times we also hear that the ashes of a cremated body was burnt in urns. So parts of body. However, since there was scarcity of resources, we don't find alongside the body any pot or any weapons being buried. The Mesolithic paintings at Bhimbetka. So we'll be discussing more about the Mesolithic paintings. But these paintings, apart from being a source of recreation, tells us or gives us a plethora of information about the community life, what type of community they have. We have depiction of male, female children doing various activities. We understand about the sexual division of labor, and also about the use of animals. Some of the animals were even eaten. Even we find that these people had a depiction of X-ray like technique. That is the whole soul. It appeared that they could look through the entire body. The earliest evidence of pottery. Now, if we talk about pottery, pottery was a utility item which was used for storing food, which was used for cooking of food. So we all are aware of the famous story that man did not know that a cooked meat tastes better until accidentally a meat which was chopped fell onto fire. Later on, they started cooking everything that they found, and they started trial and hit method so as to find out whether it tastes better after being cooked or consumed in a raw way. And especially with the grains, it was better digestible after being cooked. They also had some pots for consumption of. The pots were first made on wheels, pottery wheels, using hand, later the use of both legs. We also find that with the maturing of civilization, the size of tools also increasing, and the tools were more sturdy. So we find that the use of microliths. These people probably also knew about bow and arrow. Bow and arrow and the knowledge of projectile enabled them to hunt from far distance, and this was also very good for their personal safety. Flake tools and other core tools of Paleolithic era also continued. So as I have been saying, that this was a phase in which the earlier practices continued and some new practices were picked up based on the convenience and also the changing ecology. So we have a distribution, and I have deliberately kept only those sites which are very important from UPSC point of view, such as the Shambarli, where we have evidence of agriculture, Bargor and Adamgarh, where we have evidence of domestication, Bhimbetka, which is known for its painting, Langanaj, along with Bhimbetka and Bagor, which is known for its early burial practice, and Chopani Mandu for the earliest evidence of pottery. Now, gradually, around 7000 BC, man started settling as an agricultural community. The rise of an agricultural community where the dependence on hunting gathering was minimal, it has been classified as an age of revolution. Historian